Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Scott Stedman podcast. I hope you are having a wonderful weekend. Hopefully, it starts to cool down a bit because here in Ohio, I just got an alert that I am in a heat wave, which having no air conditioning in your office because we're working on our AC units has been miserable. And like I told Micah before we started recording, I was telling him like, yeah, once we're done, I'm probably just going to leave and go back home where it's air conditioned to work because I'm miserable right now. Probably at the end, you'll just see my head all wet and just drops of sweat coming down my face. But hopefully, the topic we're talking about won't make you guys sweat, and if it does, then well, we need to check ourselves then. But joining me for this discussion is Micah Current. Micah, how are you today?
Um, I'm good. I don't know if I told you this, but like at the beginning of summer, like at the tail end of spring, our air conditioner went out.
Ooh.
And so we had to replace the whole unit.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was six or seven thousand dollars.
Jeez.
And but to be fair, the couple of weeks that we've had like straight weeks of 90-degree weather, and I'm, in one of the rooms of the house and I hear that air kick on, I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I spent the money to fix that. I'm so glad I I'm so glad I dropped the money to fix
Yeah.
the picture. Um, but but yeah, I'm doing pretty good. It's crazy times.
Crazy times. And man, I know the last few episodes we've been talking about scandal after scandal after scandal, whether it's with Faith Light Church out in New Albany um or Michael Tate. We talked a little bit about that. And it just seems like, and especially, the meme that's been going around, or at least Mike, I don't know if you saw it with the CEO of Astronomer at the Coldplay concert. And how many
Basically,
memes are coming out
basically
from that?
flaunting his affair at a concert.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Wow. So yeah, there's a lot of things that's been happening that just kind of been on our radar, things that we're seeing both within our world and within churches. And Micah, you actually asked me like, have we ever done an episode where we talked about pastoral ethics? Um, And I find it fascinating because even though we've covered things about scandals and different people and everything else from Matt Chandler all the way up to Michael Tate, the only time we talked about ethics was about pastors using people in the church or even their kids in sermon illustrations and how to navigate that. But as far as how church leadership should compose themselves ethically, it's one of those things where we don't talk about it. And I also feel like it's one of those things that even within seminary, we don't really, or seminary or Bible school, it's not really talked about. I know I took a Christian ethics class in seminary, and we kind of talked a little bit about more ethical things, like as far as theology, theological matters, and everything else. But the thing about personnel and how do we conduct ourselves and how do we present ourselves in front of people, whether it's what we're preaching, when we're having meetings, when we're counseling people, whether it's like psychological counseling or just meeting with people to kind of talk about certain things or meeting with people, like how do we conduct ourselves in a way that A protects the pastor from doing any wrongdoing or the perception of doing wrongdoing, but then how do we also protect the people, the visitors, and the overall church that we are pastoring? And I don't think there's at least enough said about ethics in that form. Have you ever taken, like when you were in seminary or Bible school, did you ever take an ethics class or
I
anything
took
to talk about ethics?
I took two different classes. One was like pastoral care,
Hmm.
and I guess it was more aimed towards like counseling and um, how to counsel folks and uh, things like that. But then I also took that was with Dr. Guy Brewer, and then I took a class with Dr. Lewis, James Lewis, um, about ethics, and both classes were phenomenal. Um, and I learned a lot and agree a lot with what was, taught within the curriculum of the courses. Um, but it's certainly, like you said, it's not something that's talked about enough. Um, I'm seeing more and more um, things in churches, local churches that are like, let's protect the children, right? Like there's a lot of um, just churches are going out of their way just to make sure that children are safe, whether it's, the
Hmm.
whole signing in and signing out of your children, uh, in a nursery or a, children's church or, uh, I don't even know, but like, parents have, these, I've seen everything from like these little pager things, like when you go to a restaurant and the thing buzzes when your table is ready to go, to the flashing light in the sanctuary, like your number, if you have a number of your kid, um, say you're say you drop Peter off at kid zone or whatever, and
Hmm.
his number is 42, and uh, you're in the middle of church, and you look up at the screen, and the screen flashes, and it says number 42. You better go check on Peter just to make sure everything's okay.
Yeah.
Um, I've seen a lot of that being emphasized in the last, I don't know, 5 to 10 years, and
Hmm.
and it's a good thing. I mean, it,
Yeah.
it really is because it protects the parents, it protects the kids, it protects the staff, it protects the church, um, and less accidents happen that way. But not sure if that answers your questions or not. But yes,
Yeah,
I
I think it does. I think it does. And I think there is like, when we talk about ethics, there has been, at least since I started going back to church when I was in middle school. Um, we had a child protection policy at a church, and really there was a lot of focus on protection of kids, background checking volunteers, making sure that there's nothing involving any type of sex or inappropriateness with minors or any type of history of anything that could do harm to children. Like, so that's why, when we ask people to serve and things, sometimes we always have to do a background check just to make sure people are all right and kosher. Um, but needless to say, like, we have to, but as far as like as a pastor training, like, what do you need to do when you are counseling someone one on one, especially if it's someone of the opposite gender? That I don't think was ever taught. Like that was very much. I feel like that stuff was taught when I was going through ordination because the person who's my mentor was Joe Engels, who's a counselor. So he was very much like, hey, make sure you do this, or if your door's shut, make sure you let people know here's the client, here's the person I'm at. We're meeting from this time to this time. I will call you when our session ends, just to kind of make sure you have some type of paper trail. Also, if you have a secretary, make sure you know when that is. If you have the capability of having your window open or have a privacy screen, make sure you have it open. But there's always was certain guidelines to make sure that if I was meeting with a woman and I was counseling her, that I needed to do something to kind of protect myself, but also to protect her so that if I'm not being creepy or whatever,
sure.
whatever situations that I may be dealing with. So when it comes to the topic of ethics, as far as being a pastor, there's not enough stuff taught about it, which is, I'm very curious, is one of the reasons why we have seen so much in the wake, especially with bigger churches like your bigger mega churches, of pastors abusing their power, taking money from the church, having an affair with another person in their thing, or even acting inappropriately with minors. Like there seems to be a wave of it happening, and whether that was something that was happening before, but we didn't have the social media channels to know about it all at once like we do now, or if it's because there's been so much within our culture where we have seen people coming out, people coming out against Harvey Weinstein and Jeffrey Epstein and all these people who have acted inappropriately with people and used their power to kind of cover stuff up, that now more people are coming out and telling their stories. And we're now kind of seeing that, like, this is not something that is going to be hidden anymore. Like everything that is hidden is now going to be made into light now. To paraphrase the scripture, that now it's almost like this is becoming a more abundant thing now because more people are willing to come out and tell their stories and say, hey, these are the type of here's the type of disgusting evil things that have been happening in the church with this particular pastor or church leader.
Yeah. Um, Back to the ethics class that I took when I was in seminary.
Mm-hmm.
Um, One of the projects we actually had to do was kind of put a schematic together of what would our plan look like if we were setting up boundaries, setting up, just um, a plan and having a plan in place, especially if you were counseling somebody of the opposite sex. Um, and, mine included, you know, if you're in a church office setting and you're counseling within your church office setting, every office has well, every office needs to have a window,
Yeah.
whether it's small, whether it's large, whether it's skinny. Somebody needs to be able to see it in there if you're walking by. Um, Another thing was, making sure that the door was cracked, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and I think you've mentioned that several times, but the door being cracked just so that, other folks, if they're walking by, can hear and know that there's something going on in that room. Um, like you said, another good one was the letting somebody know that you're doing, the counseling session, and then like having them call you as soon as that session's over, just to make sure that you're covered.
Yeah.
Uh, Another one I, used in an illustration was why, in most cases, the church building, unless you have evening programming or it's Sunday morning or, things are going on, you could technically do your session like out in an open room, like in a bigger room, so that you're not enclosed. Um, Another thing we practiced a lot was, and this was actually one of the churches that I was interning at. We um, never rode in a car with,
Mm,
um, we always rode in threes.
yeah.
And whether it was two girls and a guy or two guys and a girl, um, you were never alone with the opposite sex, especially in a car.
Yeah.
Um, if the person is younger and is in need of help or something like that, you need to make the proper arrangements for parents to come and get their kids when the session is over. Um, I'm just a big proponent of covering yourself because you don't want to put yourself in a position of scrutiny if nothing even happened. And I think a lot of that for me stems from trauma as a younger. person as a
Mhm.
teenager. I don't know if I shared it on this podcast or not, but um, when I was in high school, we had a band director who had an affair with an underage
Mm.
student, and we also found out that they were embezzling money. And we had a month to go before I was going to graduate high school, and we walked into band rehearsal, and the band director was no longer there, and he had been taken out in handcuffs prior to, earlier that afternoon. And
Mm.
so I've also had a family member who was a youth pastor and had an affair with an underage student. And um, even those, even though those things don't directly impact me, they still brought a lot of trauma and a lot of hurt to
Mhm.
to me, and also making me want to protect myself and others even more. It's almost like I'm paranoid to a degree
Yeah.
of just wanting to double, like, there's been times, Scott, where I've worked in church settings, and we like, hey, let's go grab dinner after church. I'll drive myself. I won't put myself in a position where I could even be, you know, blamed or considered to be blamed for something that may or may not happen.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. Yeah, and you bring up a good point because when I was taking counseling classes as a counselor in seminary, and we were taking counseling ethics, and we're looking at the American Counseling Association manual and ethical manual, and also they also had like a Christian Association too manual too. So we're looking at both. And what I remember specifically about, they always say like something, when something's repetitive, it becomes habit, right? And one of the things every single time we met, which we met once a week, and it was like a all day class, we got, basically they dumped a bunch of information on us. We read, we process everything, we go back to class, we learn more, and get dumped on again with all this information. And when it came to ethics, counsel and ethics, the professor would always say, it's always important that you do not have a intimate sexual relationship with your clients. Never, never, never. And even like before, like there was ruling within the ACA that you could not have a relationship with your client ever. Like even if you have terminated services, even if you're no longer seeing this client for a number of years, you as a counselor cannot have a romantic relationship with the client ever. Eventually, eventually they changed the rule, but it has to be 30 years after you terminated services.
wow.
And I think the reasoning behind that, because again, when you're counseling somebody, you are, as a counselor, you are trying to help someone unpack a lot of stuff in their lives. So as you're sharing, and obviously maybe they'll share something that may resonate with something from your history that you want to share too, like, hey, I also had this struggle, or hey, I've also too been through a divorce as well, I know how hard it is. And you're sharing, and you're trying to help each other, and you're kind of working as a team to kind of help your client get better. But since you're dealing with psychology and emotions, that
Oh,
there can be a attraction there, an intimate attraction there, which when which again, like, you can start having feelings for this other person. So the reason why the ACA is saying, well, you can never have a relationship with this client, so yeah, after 30 years, because if you terminate services and it's 30 years and you are still have a good relationship with this person, and you feel like that you two can have a healthy relationship, then they're saying okay, because now that intimate time within the counseling room has wore off, that you can now actually have a relationship with your client. But that change was probably, I want to say recent, but in reality, it was probably maybe 10 years ago. But still, like up until that point, you're not allowed to have a relationship with a client ever. So, but one of the biggest things that he said was that the biggest danger that you could run to as a counselor is to always think it can never happen to me. And I think that's good advice, because I think even within ministry context, we say, well, I'm a pastor. I read the Bible. I pray. I have a deep relationship with the Lord. There's no way that I would ever steal money from the church, have an affair with another person in the church, act inappropriately with a underage student. Like I would never do that. And when you start to think that this will never happen to you, it's almost like you kind of have this pride build up, like, well, I'm the super spiritual person. I'm never going to act this way. So I don't need to put on the safeguards. And I think that's where we get into trouble. We don't, we start having sessions with people and the doors are closed. Church people start to be comfortable with us that we don't have to have other people in the room when money's being counted. Or when a receipt doesn't get turned in, instead of going, oops, my bad, and just kind of take the word like, oh yeah, it was for some new hymnals. Oh, okay. And you just believe the pastor's word and said, like, no, we need a receipt. We need to check this out to make sure that it wasn't you just paid for a whole Bahama vacation on the church's dime instead of your own salary because of whatever. And I think when you start getting too comfortable and you start to believe that, well, this will never happen to me, and you start stripping away those safeguards, that's when you get into the most dangerous point where you can then start acting, because again, you almost feel like that you have power. Well, I'm Pastor Scott and I can do no wrong. So then you start thinking and you start moving in certain ways. And to kind of even illustrate that point, like I think that's why we're seeing so much within bigger churches and all these scandals coming out, and you're finding about all these years of abuse, because there's a time where it's like, well, this is the pastor's son, and he's a leader in the church, and he's someone who's trusted and a very good friend, and we kind of see him as a family member. He would never do anything wrong. But then, oh, guess what? He was molesting children for 20 years. Um, so when it comes to practical safeguards, I think we shouldn't remove safeguards because we see them as inconvenience. We should keep safeguards in because it's going to be a better benefit for everybody involved, whether it's a counseling, money, again, traveling somewhere. Like it plus it helps eliminate any type of rumors or any suggestion of wrongdoing when you have these safeguards in place.
Yeah, I mean, it's something you said earlier, Scott, was, you know, oh, I would never do this, or I would never do that, or I would never put myself in a position like it's like it's almost too common sense to make sense, if that makes sense,
Yeah,
right? That was a mouthful.
yeah.
It's
Well,
it's almost too common sense to make sense of it all, right?
yeah.
Like you put yourself in a position and you're like, well, you probably shouldn't have done that.
And the reality is that a lot of times having, even if you have safeguards, even if you have all the safeguards in place, it's always still good to have another person, an accountability partner, to always kind of be a person to bounce stuff, ideas off you. Because even if you have, like, for example, like if I came into another church, if I'm working at another church, fairly new, don't really know much of the people, and let's say there's a person who comes up to me and they want counseling. And yet I know them at the church, don't really know them. So part of me might be like, okay, and there may be somebody that I may trust within the church, like maybe an elder, maybe like the head of my elder board or head of like my leadership board, and just say, hey, and even just tell them, hey, so and so contact me. They want counseling services. And even just having that conversation, they may say, "Oh, be careful." And if I ask why, they go, "Well, because this is the type of person who always comes to counseling, but then they always are willing to do something, like always willing to use that as a way to kind of discredit the integrity of pastors. And every time when they bring up a charge, we investigate it and we find out it's under false pretenses, but because this person is spilling the beans throughout the congregation, is kind of causing some stuff. So it's one of those things where it's like, okay, well, then that's when, even though I have a secretary, even though I have my door open, everything else, maybe that might be a situation where I might have to say, hey, I'm still open to counseling. However, I'm going to have another person in the room. Here's the person that's going to be in the room. Are you okay with that? Because it's better, because I mean, as much as I'm in a counseling room and I can say everything, I can write up a report, I can write up a counseling report, which usually I do when I do meet with people for counseling. I kind of write a report of everything we talked about. Um, if they say no, then that's okay. They just want to meet with me individual. Then I might say, well, I'm still new here. I don't know a lot of people. This is just kind of my safeguard to make sure that things are safe. Or I might say, is there another person that you would recommend that goes in there? And then that way we can kind of make a deal, but maybe just meeting with someone one on one may not necessarily be the same source. And I know as a pastor, we want to try to help people. We want to help our congregants. We want to pray for them. We want to do whatever we can to kind of make the church better. And so when there is something like that where you're putting an extra safeguard because maybe someone in church is like, hey, there's been some issues in the past with this individual when it comes to meeting with the pastor one on one, then even though it's another safeguard and you feel like you may turn somebody away, at the end of the day, I want to make sure that the only complaint was is that I had to turn somebody away for counseling because I want to have an extra person in the room versus now there's stuff going on, false information being spread about me or false information being spread about this person because of a one-on-one meeting, even though I had all the parameters in place of letting people know who I'm meeting with, giving them a time limit, having my blinder open on my office. So I think at the end, as pastors, we have to do our due diligence to make sure we put those safeguards in. And especially if we work at a church and they have no safeguards regarding pastoral care, um, children, youth, etc., then as a pastor, that's something where you kind of have to lead the charge to make sure that those things get put into place. Because if they don't get put into place, then there's going to be the potential of things being covered up. And really, we're just setting a breeding ground for bad things to happen within the church that don't need to be if we actually are able to put safeguards in to make sure that everybody that's within our care of the church, pastors and lay leaders and just congregants are being safe and well taken care of.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts, Micah?
Um, no, not much. I mean, I think we covered it. I mean, it's there was something I wanted to say earlier, but we were talking about this before we hit record. Um, I have a friend who works where I do now, but he was a band director for 20 years, and he two rules they live by, right? Don't touch the kids and don't touch the money. And so I I don't think it could get much simpler than that, but yet again, people do stupid things, and money makes people do stupid things. And yeah, so I also think it's important to have accountability.
Yeah. I
Not saying
mean,
like not not saying like if you've done something already, but I'm just saying like, you know, if you're counseling somebody like I mean, you made a great illustration earlier. If you're going to counsel somebody from 5 to 6, have your friend call you at 6 o'clock and say, "Hey, I'm ready to go."
well, and even with accountability, like maybe if there's something where, and again, I think a lot of times, and again, I think for more, I see more of it happening in regards to relationship and more relationships than anything. But the fact that like if I have a pastor who I'm an accountability partner for, and that I would rather have that pastor call me and tell me, "Hey, I want to talk to you. There's this lady at the church that I'm starting to have an attraction to. Again, he's this person's married, has kids, and I really need prayer and I really need help because I feel like that things are, I feel like I could act in a way that's going to be dishonoring to me and to my family and to the church." Okay, I would rather have that phone call and walk through you and process it and seek counsel and maybe even refer you to a counselor to really trigger some of these feelings that you're dealing with versus you calling me and saying, "Hey, I slept with a person at the church. That's not my spouse." Because then what am I going to do then? I can't, then all I'm doing is I'm helping you deal with damage control or helping you trying to really navigate this in the best way that's going to be honoring to the church and to the people. Like, I'm not going to be there to cover up your sin. I'm going to I mean, really, if someone calls me and says, "Hey, I screwed up, I did this," I'm going to say, "Okay, well, does your wife know?" "Nope." "Well, you need to let her know." "Does your elder board know?" "Nope." You need to let them know first before they find out. Because if they find out, then you're already in trouble. It's best for you to come clean, to talk about it right at the get-go of what happened, what you did, how it happened. Not, like why, not even why, just say it happened. I'm sorry. And then I say from there, let your leadership team decide what's going to be the best interest for you and your family. And if it's you have to leave the church, you're going to have to leave the church. And that's the reality of it. But for you to hide that sin is going to be more damaging to your community and to your church and to your family and to your kids and even to the person you had an affair with than actually coming clean. But in a perfect world, I would rather have you come up to me before the affair even happened and say, "Hey, I'm having these feelings. I'm having these strong feelings towards another person in the church that's not my spouse. I don't know what to do. I'm kind of struggling here." And he's like, "Okay, let's talk about it. Let's try to figure out what's going on." That's what I would rather have. Because then at the end, either you take my advice or we talk about it, we get to a thing, or you say that you don't care what I think, and then you go and do your own thing, and then you get in trouble. Then at that point, it's like, well, I did everything I could. You just didn't choose to listen to me, or listen to a counselor, or listen to another pastor, or listen to your elder board, or anything else that could help you navigate some of these strong emotional ties that you have. But yeah, so accountability is always going to be the best policy when it comes to dealing with ethics. Because if you have good accountability partners, if you have good safeguards that's set up either by you or by your church or both, then at the end of the day, you're going to be able to do good when you're doing your pastorals care with every generation within your church because you have the safeguards to help make sure that you're protected. But most importantly, the safeguards are not only there to protect you as a minister, it's there to protect you as it's there to protect your congregation as well, to make sure that they're safe, that they're secure, that no harm is going to happen to them as well. So, friends, that is going to be it for Micah and I. So, let us know, do you as a church, do you have safeguards to kind of help protect for some of these things for pastoral care guidelines? Were you someone who went through college or went through seminary, went through Bible school, or went through pastoral training and never once talked about ethics or setting safeguards or anything else. We would like to know your stories. We'd like to hear from you. And then again, if you send us an email or write in our comments, we will then have the opportunity to read your stuff on the air for you all to be able to have a part in this conversation. So friends, thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll be back on with another episode. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Scott Stedman Podcast. The Scott Stedman Podcast is made possible by support from our listeners. We thank listeners like Patty and Scott, whose support goes to this podcast's continual growth and maintenance. If you want to support this podcast, you can do so in a number of ways. First, feel free to give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed this episode and share it with your friends. If you'd like to financially support the Scott Stedman Podcast, you can go to the website ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman Podcast. That website again is ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman Podcast. Thank you so much for listening.